Hello, it's the start of a new year, so it's a good time to consider what the next 12 months might have in store and some of the key issues we work on in the UK and Ireland. But let's be clear, however we or anyone else may speculate, our eternal God is sovereign and he will accomplish his purposes for his own glory. As it says in Isaiah chapter 46, I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times things not yet done, saying my counsel shall stand and I will accomplish all my purpose. Nonetheless, there are some matters which with some justification we can expect to need our attention in 2025. Here to help us unpack them are my colleagues, Deputy Director Simon Calvert and Head of Policy and Research Dave Greatrex. Right, well, let's get into it. Let's start with the very current issue of assisted suicide, both in Westminster and at Holyrood.
Sure. So the Leadbeater Bill at Westminster, as we know, passed at second reading and is now at committee stage. We expect that committee stage to run through the first few months of 2025 and remaining stages. So the next opportunity for MPs as a whole to vote on the bill, we're expecting that to be on the 25th of April.
It's important to remember that to have got 275 MPs to vote against the assisted suicide bill was actually a great achievement, given where we thought we were in July. And also, we have to recognise that going into that debate, in terms of the media discussion around it, the momentum was very much on our side. So it's important that we do everything we can to maintain that momentum, because in April, MPs will have another opportunity to vote down the bill. Now, there were some MPs who said that they supported it at second reading simply to allow it to be debated and to allow safeguards to be added. And so if they're not satisfied, those MPs could change their minds and vote against the bill at third reading. So it's really still all to play for.
So Simon, you meet a lot of MPs. What can you say to our supporters to encourage them about their interactions with their MPs on this issue of assisted suicide?
Well, firstly, it's just right to do anyway, regardless of whether you change your MP's mind for the better. Secondly, MPs do listen to constituents, and especially on this issue, which is a free vote issue. They're not whipped by their parties. They're not ordered to vote one way or the other. So there is scope for people's minds to be changed on this. And I think that's very important as well. And the third thing to say is there's so much about this issue which hasn't yet been properly debated or discussed. The frustration at second reading was actually the failure of proponents of the bill to properly engage with some of the really key arguments. So I think that there are strong arguments which MPs need to hear.
So that's Westminster. Dave, let's not forget that there's something similar going on in Holyrood as well. Tell us about the Liam MacArthur bill.
Liam MacArthur's bill at Holyrood is also at committee stage, but the committee stage there is slightly different order. So you have a committee stage before all of the MSPs in the plenary chamber actually debate the principles of the issue. So that committee has been taking evidence and will produce, probably in February, will produce a stage one report, and that report will then be debated by all MSPs probably towards the back end of February.
Yeah, and the specifics of the bills are different, but in terms of the broad principles of the fact of how do you ascertain terminal illness, the involvement of doctors, the inevitable shift away from palliative care, we're talking about broadly talking about the same kind of problems, aren't we?
Absolutely the same problems. I mean, the MacArthur bill it doesn't have the 6-month prognosis criteria that is in the Leadbeater bill, so there are differences like that. But in terms of our concerns, certainly as a matter of principle, those concerns are the same. Mm-hmm. And the implications in terms of the creep of that legislation, the inevitable creep of that legislation, as we've seen in other international jurisdictions, remains the same.
Yeah. And in every jurisdiction where this has been brought in. Yeah, so 2025 is going to be a very significant year in terms of dealing with assisted suicide legislation. Let's move on. Conversion therapy. It's been a massive campaign for us since going back to 2018. In the King's speech, the government said that there was going to be a draft bill. When can we expect that?
Okay. The first thing to emphasise that because this is, as you say, a draft bill, we have more opportunity for Parliament to scrutinise these proposals than you would normally get. And that's good, because this is one of those issues where the more politicians look at it, the less they like it, and the more they realise it's just unworkable. So in terms of the timing, I guess we had expected that the government would have published its draft bill by now. That delay, again, just lends credence to the idea that civil servants and ministers are just finding it harder. I mean, don't forget, in Scotland, of course, they had 12 clauses of a bill, 86-page consultation document, and that has more or less fallen apart because it's just proven to be unworkable, and they're worried about legal challenges.
And just briefly as an aside, I mean, Ireland has also said that having looked at it, it's far too complex. Yeah. So there is an increasing recognition.
And Netherlands and Sweden, other countries where, yes, the more they've looked at it, the more they've realised it's just not possible to deliver what the activists want, which is a speech crime. Yeah. But I think we will probably see the government's draft bill early in 2025, and that will be, again, probably an opportunity for Parliament to take evidence. There'll be a committee, perhaps a joint committee of the Lords and Commons, and that will be an opportunity for people to be able to contribute to the debate and put forward evidence and just try and help to make the case that this is dangerous, unnecessary, can't be done.
Yeah, because can you imagine any version of that bill which is going to be acceptable?
Not now, no. I mean, several years ago, I was trying to keep an open mind about this. Maybe there's a gap in the law. Maybe, with good faith on both sides, you can identify a way of addressing that gap. There is no gap in the law. No one's ever identified a gap in the law. The evidence base for this whole thing is garbage. And there isn't good faith on the other side either. They're quite clear. They don't want a carefully crafted law to deal with abuse, because abuse is already illegal. They want a speech crime. They want to stop Christians and gender-critical feminists saying words that they don't agree with. And that's why it's unworkable.
So our supporters are watching this. We want to encourage them to continue to be engaged on this issue, don't we? Because they would understandably say, well, you've been talking about this for a long time. But it's important to remember to not grow weary in doing good. Hopefully everybody is sufficiently aware of what the issues there are at stake, the impact on the ordinary work of churches, the impact on prayer and preaching and pastoral care and parenting, ordinary conversations. If this draft bill does come out, it's going to be really important that supporters get engaged with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just gospel freedom at stake, and it's not just conversations between Christian parents and their kids. There are lots of non-Christian people who are just as worried about this proposal because they want to be able to have conversations. For example, a mum who wants to talk to her daughter who's sort of threatening to obtain illegal puberty blockers from the internet. There's a possibility that this legislation could criminalise the mum for that conversation. And that's before you get onto the territory of therapists who want to just be able to have open conversations with clients rather than fearing being prosecuted. So there are lots of other people who are concerned about this, and we should be encouraged by that too.
Dave, just briefly remind everyone of the legal opinions that we've had on this issue. We've had a number of them.
Yeah, so I mean, we had opinions on the Scottish version of the proposed legislation. We've had successive opinions on number of iterations of amendments to the criminal justice bill, and each time those opinions very clearly state that human rights are infringed by what has been suggested, and that it would impact on the ordinary work of churches, on those conversations between parents and their children. So each time it's clear whatever activists try to do, whatever governments try to do on this issue, they're coming up against human rights problems.
Okay, well, let's stay in this whole area of free speech and religious liberty. It's a broad area, guys, and I realise this, but and we won't be able to get into the nitty-gritty of everything, but there are a number of initiatives, a number of moves being talked about which are going to risk clamping down on free speech, which we need to keep our eyes on in 2025. That might be the expansion, or the proposed expansion of non-crime hate incidents. That's troubling, the rapid review of extremism, the hate speech law in Ireland. So putting all of that together, what can we expect this year in the area of free speech and religious liberty?
I mean, so many of these areas, we don't quite know what is being proposed. Mm-hmm. But what we do know is that we've been here before, and we know that the proposals that people bring forward are so often incredibly dangerous, that there is a particular problem that they identify, but rather than targeting a solution at that problem, they have something much broader And they try to reassure us, don't worry, we're only going to use it over here for this problem, but that's not what the law states.
Yeah,
so
it's
there's
the
this
cliche of sledgehammer to crack a nut.
exactly,
Isn't it?
yeah, or just the blunderbuss when the surgeon's knife is needed. And that's what we're concerned about in all these things, that instead of having a properly targeted, appropriate threshold, it's something that is broad.
Mm-hmm. Simon, you've been talking about non-crime hate incidents with the press recently. Do you just want to go into a little bit of detail on that for us?
Well, that's fascinating because, of course, we've been complaining about these non-crime hate incidents for years. The idea that police should waste their time, and estimates are that 60,000 police hours a year, wasting their time recording incidents which are, first of all, not verified. It's not like normal police intelligence where they kind of grade it and work out whether they think it's true or not, and where it's purely kind of perception-based. So if I say, I had a conversation with Kieran, he hurt my feelings, he made me feel bad about my religion. Mm-hmm. The police just have to record that against you as a non-crime hate incident if I ask them to, basically. And that's just a terrible system. It's a terrible waste of police time. And then the idea that police would somehow use that to make decisions about kind of deployment of resources when it's not verified, it's wide open to being, to false allegations and so on. So it's just a bad system.
And people can think, can't they, that, well, I mean, someone's made a complaint, it sort of doesn't matter, it has no impact on me, but that's not the case, is it?
That's right. I mean, firstly, the police say, and we've got this in writing, they're afraid not to record these things in case they get criticised for doing it. And secondly, if you apply for a DBS check because you're going to be working with young people or vulnerable people in your church, that's the kind of thing which might show up in your DBS check. I mean, it can be a life-changing thing to have a false allegation like that kind of buried in your police record. The narrative around NCHIs, having said that we've been complaining about it for years, the narrative around NCHIs has really shifted a lot, especially in the last few weeks of 2024 with the Alison Pearson case. Now, not going into the detail of that, which is complex, it's focused attention on this whole thing to the extent that whereas the Home Secretary had been promising to effectively increase the number of NCHI reports, she's now kind of trying to backpedal that a bit. So the government is under a lot of pressure from people who just see that this is a bad system. And thankfully now you've got senior police figures calling for a review of whether we should have the system at all.
Yes, just at the back end of the year, the head of the College of Police and saying that this, being very clear actually, that this is a waste of police time. Yeah. But that does seem to be in a little bit of tension with, as you say, Home Secretary saying that she wants to have more of these. So what else is going on in this arena that we think is going to be significant in 2025?
Well, you mentioned Ireland, and they have new hate crime legislation there. That remains to be implemented, or we remain to see how that is implemented.
There's a lot of worry in Ireland about what's going to happen with that. It's not as bad as it could have been, but there's still some genuine concerns about.
That's right. I mean, the most dangerous aspect of the proposed legislation was dropped, which was the freestanding hate speech offence. But there is quite a disturbingly broad definition of gender still within that hate crime legislation that did pass. That includes trans and
well, there's no limit to it, is there? I mean, other genders.
Someone suggested 800 genders could be covered by that definition. So that remains a concern. And although that hate speech provision was dropped, it was very much dropped for now.
Yeah.
And the Justice Minister said that they couldn't bring it forward now because there wasn't consensus, but presumably they will be working to achieve that consensus, in which case that could come back on the agenda.
Yes, and of course the two big parties, it looks almost certain that they're going to be back in the coalition government. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about Ofcom as well in terms of the implementation of the Online Safety Act.
Well, I mean, this is happening in stages. I mean, people may almost have forgotten the Online Safety Act that was passed and finalised in 2023. Ofcom has been consulting on various aspects of guidance since then. We're expecting in early 2025, in January, we're expecting the implementation of some aspects of that, particularly the illegal content duties. So where websites will have to start assessing what illegal content is on their sites and making risk assessments, and then ensuring they have protections that it's removing or protecting particularly children from that content.
Which is all good if it's implemented properly, and there's
absolutely.
a question over to the extent.
Yeah, and we never argued about the illegal content duties.
Yeah.
So we're happy for that to proceed. There's a further delay in terms of the tackling pornography, which we wish was tackled years ago. But hopefully they are going to get around to that in the latter part of the year. But the concern with the online safety legislation from our point of view was always this legal but harmful.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to pick up, because we campaigned against it, and in November 2022 the government rightly finally ditched it, but the noise around it hasn't gone away, has it?
No, that's right.
There's still pressure to revisit that and bring it back in.
Yeah, and at the time it was the previous administration, the Conservative administration, dropped those provisions, and Labour very much opposed the dropping of legal but harmful at that time. So we have every expectation they might return to it. And there were noises from the minister towards the back end of 2024 when bringing into force, or laying before the House at least, the illegal content aspects, lamenting that he wasn't able to go further because he was constrained by the way in which the bill had been amended. And so that's definitely an area of significant concern.
And the battle here, whether it's legal but harmful, the extremism review, kind of so-called hate crimes, often the battle, it goes back to Dave's point that kind of how you define these things, because it's like the language of extremism or misinformation, disinformation. Sadly, these terms, and even terms like hatred, are being devalued by people who are using them in political ways. So what they really mean by disinformation is, I don't want people to be able to agree with your opinions, so I'm going to label it as disinformation, or extremism, or hatred, or harm, or whatever it is. And I think more and more people understand that. Now, that's not to say that there aren't kind of real problems to be addressed, but so much of the noise around this is that sort of competition between people on the one hand who think other people should be allowed to express views that I don't agree with, and people who don't believe other people should be able to express views that they don't agree with. But that's a winnable argument again, and I want to encourage people to know that there are plenty of people kind of waking up to this and willing to take a stand, and it's important that we as Christians help to give a lead on talking sensibly about these things.
There's a lot of things that we could use this time to talk about, but I just want to, for the purposes of time, just talk about sort of one or two more areas. And liberalisation. So there's always pressure to liberalise drugs laws. There's always pressure to liberalise abortion laws. Can we expect to see either or both of those things cropping up again this year?
I mean, you're right, the pressure is always there on both issues. I think the more likely of the two that we might see so backbench attempts to change the law on would be abortion. Any sign of a criminal justice bill, and there'll be certain backbench MPs who've tried before and will try again to put down amendments to decriminalise abortion. I would say that's highly likely if there is a criminal justice bill, and it's quite rare that there isn't a criminal justice bill that's something could be attached to on the abortion issue.
Yeah, I think the drugs issue, I think there's much more of a shared understanding that liberalising the law on drugs is a dangerous idea, is a bad idea. We've seen quite a lot of pressure coming from the Scottish government to try and liberalise the law on drugs, and concerned about them basically failing to implement the existing law. I'm not sure myself that I feel that there's kind of enough pressure behind the pro-legalisation argument for
actually
that to really
almost
catch on.
Been a little bit of a shift in a sort of a gradual waking up to that decriminalisation, which was seen as some sort of panacea, perhaps isn't all it was cracked up to be.
And a lot of that is just to do with people's own experience. I mean, how many people look at people who are regular users of currently illegal drugs and they think, oh, their lives are absolutely fine, we could allow for a lot more of that. They don't. They see people regularly using recreational drugs. They see how it wrecks their lives, and they think it will be terribly irresponsible to make that even easier. The real issue actually is there's been a failure to enforce the law. And I think the counter argument we need to be making is, people say the war on drugs has failed. The war on drugs has never been fought.
Hasn't been fought. Exactly. Yeah. Well, as I said, I mean, we could spend quite a lot of time here, but I mean, we haven't talked about gambling, and the government's made some good moves in gambling recently, and we hope that they might do a little bit more. We haven't talked about education, which was been a massive topic over 2024 and 2023. But I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts on the shift in the transgender ideology narrative that's going on. You know, there's changes in puberty blockers, there's potential changes in guidance for schools that would be helpful. What are your thoughts in terms of the direction of travel on that issue?
Yeah, so the issue of puberty blockers, we must be very thankful that this government, like the last government, is persuaded that it's dangerous to give kids sort of unhindered access to puberty blockers. Of course, there are concerns about these puberty blocker trials. I mean, how in the world you can ethically have trials for drugs which we know are dangerous, I have no idea. But there are lots of other implications of that to work through. There's currently a legal challenge, for example, over the fact that the CQC has registered Gender GP, which is staffed by former Tavistock Clinic professionals who were the ones kind of dishing out those drugs. I think there's plenty more territory to be fought for, but I think we have to be thankful that the argument around puberty blockers has been won, and I think public opinion on this issue has shifted massively. The surveys show that the proportion of people who support the idea that a man can get a birth certificate saying that he was born a girl, the support for that has collapsed. Mm-hmm. And that is enshrined in a law that's more than 20 years old. So again, this is one of those issues where the more people have seen of it, the more they've seen the damage it causes, and the less they like it. Just to
pick up on that phrase, that is a recurring theme, isn't it? And of course, that is why we do what we do, is to make people aware that perhaps what they're getting in the press, what they're hearing on the BBC, isn't the entirety of the story. And when their eyes are open to some of the issues or some of the complexities or some of the risks around not just puberty blockers, but all of these issues, assisted suicide, conversion therapy, the more that we can do that and the more that our supporters can help us in putting that message out there, the more we can do to change people's minds on these things.
Yes, because the truth is true, and it's true for everyone. And the truth can stand on its own 2 feet. And people can recognise that truth. I always talk about Romans 1 and 2, that people's consciences can, it says, defend them because they recognise what's right and they seek to do the right thing. And so, yes, again, with so many of these issues, those who've been advancing, these terrible agendas have often done it by not allowing people to really understand what it is they really want. And so the more we can help to expose what's really going on, the more I think that we can win the argument.
Well, thank you both very much for your time. We could have talked about more things and for a lot longer, but let's leave it there for now. And if you want to know any more about any of those issues and more besides, go to our website, christian.org.uk. If you're not already signed up to our mailing list, I would really encourage you to do that. Details are on the screen. We do look forward to seeing many of you at the hundreds of meetings we'll be carrying out all over the UK and Ireland again this year. And do please keep praying for us. There's a lot of issues to cover, and what you've just heard is just part of what we do, of course. Please pray for us as we seek to equip Christians to live out their faith in every area of life. Thank you and goodbye.
For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.